I've always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and urban legends never convinced me. So, when my aunt invited me to spend a few days at an old convent where she volunteered, I accepted without hesitation. The place was remote, surrounded by dense forests and a silence so deep it seemed to swallow every sound. But what really caught my attention were the stories told by the locals, voices in the middle of the night, shadows crossing the hallways, and the most chilling of all, the legend of a missing nun. On my first night, everything seemed normal. The hallways, though dark, were quiet, and the sound of the wind against the windows created an almost soothing melody. However, around 2 a.m, I woke up to a strange sound. It was as if someone was whispering my name. It must be my imagination, I thought, trying to convince myself as I pulled the pillow over my head. But the whisper continued, this time closer and clearly coming from the hallway. I decided to get up and check, trying to stay calm. I slowly opened the door and found the hallway empty. The only light came from a candle burning at the end of the corridor near a small chapel. As I walked closer, the air grew heavier. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I quickly turned around, but no one was there. The silence was so oppressive that I could hear my heart pounding. Even so, I kept moving toward the chapel. Inside, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At the altar, a figure knelt, a veil covering their face. I thought it was one of the nuns, so I calmly called out to her. The figure didn't respond. As I took another step, the candle on the altar went out on its own, plunging the room into darkness. My whole body froze. A faint but clear whisper echoed, "Help me." When the candle suddenly reignited, the figure was gone. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, trying to rationalize what had happened. The next morning I told my aunt. She gave me a serious look and revealed something that sent chills down my spine. Years ago, a young nun had mysteriously disappeared. Many believe she still roams the convent, seeking help. After that, I could never sleep properly again. Every noise, every shadow seemed to confirm I wasn't alone in that place. When the day came to leave, I felt a mix of relief and unease. As I said my goodbyes, one of the older nuns approached me with an enigmatic smile and said, "She chose you. Come back someday." Those words haunt me to this day. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to return, but one thing is certain. I'm no longer a skeptic. That experience showed me that some mysteries go far beyond what we can explain. I'm not exactly sure where to start, but I'll try to explain as best as I can what happened that night. It all started when my friends insisted on exploring an abandoned church on the outskirts of town. They said it would be fun, that we'd just take a few pictures and then leave. The church had been closed for decades, yet stories about it never stopped. Some people claimed they heard chanting coming from inside, even though no one was there. Others swore they saw shadows moving behind the shattered windows. I never believed any of it, until that night. We arrived around 11 at night, when the town was already silent. The church was massive, but completely consumed by time. The wooden doors were broken, and the main stained glass window, which must have once been stunning, was shattered. The air inside was heavy, almost suffocating, and the smell of mold mixed with something metallic made me feel nauseous. As soon as we stepped inside, the sound of our footsteps echoed through the hall, as if someone, or something, was listening. One of my friends laughed nervously, trying to break the tension, but it only made things worse. That's when we heard it, a whisper that seemed to come from every direction. We froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Everyone nodded. It was as if someone was there, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. We decided it was time to leave, but when we turned towards the door, it was gone. What had once been the exit was now just a solid stone wall. Panic set in. We ran back and forth, but it felt like the church was shifting. The pews, which had been haphazardly scattered, were now perfectly aligned, as if waiting for a service to begin. That's when we saw the figure. On the altar stood a tall shadow, completely still, watching us. It had no face, but somehow I knew it was staring right at us. "Who are you?" one of my friends shouted, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised an arm, pointing to a specific spot on the floor. When we looked, we saw something that hadn't been there before, a small door, like an entrance to a basement. With no other choice, we opened it. What we found down there was worse than anything I could have imagined. It was a small, dark room, with walls covered in candles and strange symbols. In the center, an old book rested on a makeshift altar. Its pages were open, and the words seemed to move, as if they were alive. Suddenly, the shadow appeared behind us, and the basement door slammed shut. Everything started to spin, and I felt myself being pulled into the book. The last thing I remember was the sound of cold, distant laughter. When I woke up, I was alone outside the church. My friends were never found. The police say they probably ran away or fell victim to some accident, but I know the truth. I see that book in my nightmares every night, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear those whispers again. Something followed me out of that church, and I'm sure it's only waiting for the right moment to take me back. My wife and I have always loved exploring unique places. On our last trip, we decided to visit a famous Buddhist temple in the Thai countryside. It was a place full of energy, peace, and history. When we arrived, we joined a group of tourists led by a local monk. Everything seemed perfect, until during a short break, we wandered off to take some pictures. Within minutes, we realized we were alone. The temple was vast, with corridors that all looked alike, and the sound of our footsteps echoed eerily. We tried to find our way back to the main path, but every corridor seemed to lead us deeper. That's when we stumbled upon an old door, slightly ajar, with inscriptions we couldn't read. What caught our attention was a faint sound of chanting coming from inside, as if a group of people was praying. Thinking it might be the rest of the group, we decided to enter. The moment we crossed the door, the atmosphere changed completely. The walls were adorned with paintings of monks and spiritual figures, all with serene expressions. But there was something unnervingly wrong with that serenity. The air felt heavy, and the chanting now sounded more like murmurs. Yet no one was there. In the center of the room stood an altar, and on it was an old bell marked by time. Intrigued, my wife lightly rang the bell. Instantly, the murmurs stopped, and an eerie silence filled the space. That's when we felt it, a presence. It was as if dozens of eyes were watching us. We looked around but saw nothing, until the shadows began to move. Translucent figures, dressed as monks, emerged around us. These figures didn't seem hostile, but they didn't offer comfort either. Their faces were blank, emotionless, as they stared at us intently. One of them, the closest, pointed toward the door, as if urging us to leave. We got the message and slowly backed away. As soon as we crossed the door, it slammed shut behind us. The chanting resumed, but this time it sounded distant, as if the temple itself was warning us never to return. When we finally rejoined the group, we realized we had been missing for hours, though it felt like only minutes to us. We told the guide what had happened, but he gave us a nervous smile and said it was impossible since that door had been locked for decades. "That's the Hall of Souls," he explained. "It's where the monks pass on to the other side. No one should ever enter there." A chill ran down our spines. Later, we researched the temple and learned that the Hall of Souls was used in rituals to help monks' spirits find peace. What we saw in that room wasn't just history. It was something alive, something that belonged to the temple. To this day, we don't know why we were drawn to that place, but one thing is certain: we will never forget the eyes of the souls that watched us.